A young fireman's untimely death raised suspicions. When a young policeman died the same way, it was no coincidence. Scientists wondered if these tiny crystals were the cause. A fireman's job is exceptionally dangerous, and for Randy Thompson, the year 2000 was particularly troublesome. First, he fell off a fire truck in Cumming, Georgia, and broke his nose. When he had surgery to repair the damage, he developed a life-threatening staph infection.
The doctors told him, this is a very, very serious situation. You can die from this very easily.
Randy survived that, but his health problems continued. One of his friends found him sprawled on his kitchen floor, vomiting and incoherent.
He started hallucinating. He looked at me and said, "Get back in your damn cage." I looked and I said, "What? Get in your cage." "What are you talking about, Randy?" I said, "Get in your cage." Then I realized he thought he was talking to his bird.
This was diagnosed as a severe stomach virus. But gradually he improved thanks to help from his common-law wife, Lynn.
Every time I talked to him, he sounded stronger and stronger. And he said, "Lynn made me grilled cheese with sweet tea." He said, "I held it down, didn't throw it up." I said, "Well, good, Randy." I said, "That's good." I said, "Maybe you're on the uphill slide of this."
2 days later, his condition deteriorated and Randy Thompson died.
Horrible. A daddy taken from his children for no reason. A man taken from a career that he loved for no reason.
At Randy's autopsy, toxicology tests found no trace of drugs or alcohol in his system. But the medical examiner found evidence of heart trouble.
He did have an enlarged heart. He did have some significant coronary artery disease. And so as a consequence, then I ascribed this gentleman's sudden unexpected death with his heart disease.
That was hard for us to swallow because he had never had any heart problems before. I was devastated. It was an experience I don't ever want to have again.
Randy left behind his common-law wife, Lynn, and their 2 young children. He was just 32 years old.
The very last thing he asked me was, "Do you think I'm gonna die?"
As time passed, Randy Thompson's friends and family gradually came to terms with his untimely death. Until a few weeks later, when Randy's mother got a letter from a total stranger, the mother of a dead policeman from the next town over. The contents of the letter were shocking.
I want to share my sorrow in the loss of your son, Randy. My son, Glenn, died 6 years ago, mysteriously.
I didn't really know what to think. Everything she told me was exactly what happened to Randy.
A few weeks after Randy Thompson's death, his mother got a letter.
I want to share my sorrow in the loss of your son, Randy.
It was from a woman who claimed her son died under similar circumstances and suggested the 2 deaths were somehow related.
I was shocked that her son and my son died the exact same way. The report from the hospital, the autopsy reports, everything was just the same.
Nita Thompson did not believe me. She kept saying, "That can't be true. That can't be true."
6 years earlier, Glenn Turner, a police officer, had the same symptoms as Randy Thompson.
He was so sick, I could hear his voice shaking when he talked to me. He just said he had an unbelievable stomach virus. He couldn't get rid of it. He was vomiting, couldn't stop vomiting. He had diarrhea. And he's just basically said to me, "Man, I've never been this sick like this."
He was also incoherent and hallucinating.
His wife said he'd had a really bad night, that in the middle of the night he had got up, began to hallucinate. He began to run around the house. He'd pulled out his weapon. He thought there was intruders outside, intruders trying to get inside the house.
Glenn's wife coaxed him back into bed. The next morning, he appeared to be better.
He'd called me he was going to go to work the next day. And I thought that, he was sounding good, and I thought that he was going to be fine.
But a few hours later, Glenn Turner died.
The medical examiner made the statement in the autopsy that he died with a irregular heartbeat. That was nothing that he ever had a problem with.
Glenn's mother immediately suspected foul play. She asked his friends in law enforcement to investigate his death, but she got nowhere.
They kept telling me that he died of natural causes, and there was no reason to go into any further because it cost too much money and that there was no foul play in his life.
I still had strong suspicions that there was something else involved in it, but the ME stated that's what it was, and I'm not a medical examiner, so I pretty much had to accept it.
And that's how it stood, until 6 years later, when the Turner family learned that Randy Thompson died the same way. It was difficult to fathom how two civil servants in two neighboring towns, both in their early 30s, died so suddenly, until both families realized they had something else in common. The two men were both living with the same woman when they died, Lynn Turner.
I couldn't turn to get on the phone quick enough. I called the lead investigator, and I just basically said, you need to go out there and seal off the apartment, do what you need to do, because I'm telling you, there's no way you could have two young guys like this pass away.
When questioned, Lynn Turner claimed it was just a tragic coincidence. And local prosecutors found no evidence the two deaths were connected. After all, Lynn Turner had no criminal history.
I actually just thought that it was really bad luck that Lynn had been involved with two men who had died that way.
And friends pointed out that Lynn's common-law husband, Randy Thompson, had very little life insurance, just $35,000, hardly enough to kill for. And toxicology tests on both Randy Thompson and Glenn Turner found no evidence of drugs or alcohol in their systems.
We still had strong suspicions that something she had done to him that caused his death. But at the time, I'm just a police officer. I'm not an ME. I couldn't prove it.
Then, investigators made a startling discovery. Even though Randy Thompson had only $35,000 worth of life insurance, Lynn was in a big hurry to collect it.
We were able to determine through cell phone records that on the day of Randy's funeral, between the time of the service in the church and the service that was held at the cemetery, Lynn was on her cell phone trying to contact the insurance company.
Maybe there was more to the death of these two men than first appeared.
Lynn must have had something to do with some of this, because there is no way two young men, police officer and a firefighter, dying at a young age without somebody doing something.
What are the chances that two civil servants, both in their early 30s, would die under mysterious circumstances from heart disease?
The southeast part of the country leads the nation in cardiovascular disease. And in our office, it is not uncommon that we see young men of Mr. Thompson's age, who have bad heart disease.
Toxicology tests on the first victim, policeman Glenn Turner, showed no signs of alcohol or illegal drugs in his system. But during Randy Thompson's autopsy, the medical examiner found calcium oxalate crystals in his kidneys. These could be the result of prescription medications, or it could be a sign of poisoning.
The first thing I did was reach across my desk and pick up the phone and call the toxicology department. and asked that an ethylene glycol test be performed.
Ethylene glycol is the chemical name for antifreeze.
When we ran the sample from Randy Thompson and analyzed it for ethylene glycol, the results came back negative for a significant quantity of ethylene glycol.
But the medical examiner had a hard time believing that.
So I thought that was very, very strange and bizarre.
Then Dr. Kaponen learned what happened to Lynn Turner's first husband, Glenn, 6 years earlier. On a hunch, he reviewed Glenn Turner's autopsy report.
I looked at all the tissues and polarized the lung and the kidney, as I do in all of my cases. And to my surprise, there were oxalate crystals in Glenn Turner's kidneys.
So Dr. Kaponen went back to the toxicology lab and asked them to recheck the test results on Randy Thompson's tissue samples. And the lab discovered they'd made a mathematical error.
I immediately realized that I had made an error in calculating the original concentration of ethylene glycol in Randy Thompson's blood, and in fact, it was off by a factor of 10. When we made the appropriate correction for the mathematical error that I had made, suddenly became a lethal level of ethylene glycol.
I've been doing this for almost 20 years now, and this is the first time that such a mistake has ever been brought to my attention.
The medical examiner now knew that Randy Thompson's death was a homicide.
Based on the corrected toxicology report, then, it was quite obvious that Mr. Thompson died as a consequence of an acute ethylene glycol intoxication or poisoning.
When I found out Randy had died from antifreeze poisoning, I knew when they exhumed Glenn's body, when they took those tissues, I knew they were going to find out he died from the exact same causes.
And that's precisely what happened. Officials exhumed Glenn Turner's body, retested his tissue samples, and confirmed there was a lethal amount of antifreeze in his system.
It's a mixed feeling because you're happy that you've got something happening, but you're not happy to hear what you hear.
Investigators did some digging into Lynn Turner's background and uncovered more incriminating evidence. First was her visit to an animal shelter shortly before Randy Thompson's murder.
Lynn had inquired about what the animal shelter uses to euthanize animals, what chemical they use.
She had claimed that she had a stray cat problem and was wondering what it was that she could do about them.
And the manager of Lynn Turner's bank told investigators Lynn had serious financial problems.
She had a lot of debts outstanding, a lot of credit cards where she was being charged for non-sufficient funds, for late charges, adding up to several thousands of dollars monthly.
Lynn had a middle-class income, but she spent like she was a millionaire. I mean, she lived well beyond her means.
And that wasn't all.
Lynn had gone into the bank a few weeks before Randy died and told one of the bank officials that she would have everything taken care of, all her payments, mortgages, everything, etc., taken care of in just a few weeks.
Prosecutors believe the motive for both murders was money. Lynn Turner was the beneficiary of her first husband's $150,000 life insurance policy and also received his pension payments of $750 a month. And she was all set to collect $200,000 from Randy Thompson's life insurance policy, but investigators found evidence that Randy double-crossed her.
Lynn had talked Randy into buying life insurance of $200,000, and she was the beneficiary of that policy. But after Randy passed away, she found out that the policy had lapsed and that she would not be getting that money.
This also raised the possibility that Randy might have suspected Lynn was trying to harm him. Investigators also learned that a container of antifreeze had been found in the home Lynn shared with her husband, Glenn Turner, although at the time, no one found this suspicious. So Lynn Turner was arrested on 2 counts of first-degree murder. She insisted she was innocent and was sure there wasn't enough evidence to convict her.
Lynn was smart. Lynn wanted to be a police officer. She knew a lot. She knew how to commit the crime. She knew what they'd look for, and she knew how to create an alibi.
Lynn Turner met her first husband, Glenn, while working as a 911 operator. But less than 2 years later, Glenn told friends the marriage was in trouble.
He said that they'd only had sex twice after they were married. He said that she had some kind of female problem and she wasn't able to have sex. Of course, we're all thinking to ourselves, well, I could name 3 or 4 other guys she's seeing that she's having sex with. Of course, I couldn't say anything to him.
Glenn also told friends Lynn was spending money faster than he could earn it.
He said, here I am working 365 days, working all these part-time jobs, sometimes 2 or 3 jobs a day. I've about got it paid off. And here she just rung them all back up again. And I mean, she just had a stack of credit cards and just spent.
While Lynn was married to Glenn, she met Randy Thompson, a fireman from a nearby town. Randy's family says Lynn lied about her marital status.
Lynn had told us she had been married, but that she was divorced. And she told all of us that, told Randy that. We assumed she was divorced.
Lynn's primary motive for murdering Glenn was for the money. I think a secondary motive was to be with Randy Thompson.
The forensic evidence suggests Lynn put antifreeze in Glenn's food, possibly in gelatin, since this was found in his stomach during his autopsy. Glenn fell violently ill and died. Lynn collected $150,000 from his life insurance along with his pension of $750 a month.
I knew she didn't love him. So I knew it was pending gloom for him, and I figured she'd use him for everything she could use him for, and then she'd spit him back out. But I never thought that she'd kill him.
Just a few weeks after Glenn's funeral, Lynn moved in with Randy Thompson. Although they had 2 children together, they were never legally married, probably because Lynn would have had to forfeit Glenn Turner's pension.
I believe that's why she didn't marry Randy. She'd have lost Glenn's pension by remarrying. So she didn't marry. She's smart. She knew that money was out.
It wasn't long before Randy Thompson told friends, just as Glenn Turner had, that he was unhappy with Lynn.
It was almost comical the way they fought, cat and dog, just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I asked him, why do you keep calling her? Why do you even take the phone calls? Well, she's the mom of my kids and blah, blah, blah. Oh, okay, whatever.
An employee of a local animal shelter said that Lynn wanted to buy the chemicals they used to euthanize cats, but they refused to sell them to her.
She didn't want to use antifreeze again. She checked around. She wanted to use something different to kill Randy, but she wasn't confident enough to use anything else. She went back to what she used before.
Randy told friends Lynn prepared his lunch shortly before he became violently ill. A grilled cheese sandwich and sweet tea. Investigators think the antifreeze was in the tea. Within a day, Randy was dead. It was only after his death that Lynn learned that Randy allowed his $200,000 life insurance policy to lapse just 11 days earlier.
She gave him the ethylene glycol. I think that it's a very slow, cruel death. It's not like you shoot someone and you immediately change your mind and start giving them first aid. I mean, there was no aid given, and she had plenty of opportunity to give aid, and she didn't on either case.
When these murders happened, antifreeze had a taste that could easily be masked with sweet-tasting foods. The industry has since modified antifreeze so that it is now unpalatable.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Julia Lynn Womack Turner, guilty of malice murder.
In May of 2004, Lynn Turner was convicted for killing her husband, Glenn. 3 years later, in 2007, Lynn was also convicted of Randy Thompson's murder. She is currently serving a life sentence with no chance for parole.
To hear the guilty verdict was very difficult. You don't like to hear that your daughter-in-law has done something like this to anybody.
Despite the mathematical misstep by the toxicology lab, scientists eventually discovered the truth about what happened to both Randy Thompson and Glenn Turner.
It was a challenging case to get it all out there, even though it really was quite simple in that you had two men who had been involved with her and both had died the exact same way.
Forensic evidence, without it, we had nothing. We wouldn't have had a case. It had been just a bunch of hearsay and rumors. But the forensic evidence, it was all the nails in the coffin. It was the hammer that put everything away.
Security cameras tracked a young woman's whereabouts shortly before she disappeared. An internet search provided some answers, and a cell phone call revealed the others. Experts say that if you're going to gamble, you should know two things. First, the odds of the game you're playing, and second, that the odds are stacked in the casino's favor. 27-year-old Christy Wilson believes she could beat those odds in her favorite game, blackjack. Her friends say she was a natural.
She's very sharp on numbers. She's mathematically whiz in her head. She can just look at things and figure them out real quick. So the odds, percentages.
She had actually studied on how to play the game, how to become better at the game, and she was actually a pretty good gambler.
On October 4th, 2005, Christy went to the Thunder Valley Casino in Lincoln, California for a night of blackjack. 2 days later, Christy's live-in boyfriend, Danny Burlando, called police to report her missing. Burlando claimed she never came home from the casino.
He's as flaky as they come the whole time. His conversations made him just as innocent as they made him look guilty.
31-year-old Danny Burlando was an unemployed car salesman who met Christy just a year earlier at a casino blackjack table. They moved in together shortly after that.
Christy Wilson's relationship with her boyfriend, Daniel Burlando, was I would say, describe it as a tumultuous relationship.
She'd come home and visit, and we found bruises on her. I didn't find them myself. My wife did and told me about them later on after she left. And to say the least, I wanted to wring his neck at the time.
Police found Christy's car in the casino parking lot. A search of her apartment found no signs of a struggle and no evidence she was planning to leave.
She left behind day-to-day personal effects, toiletry items, clothes, medication she was taking regularly. She left behind her cat, something very important to her. So items that if she was to take off and flee the area, perhaps she would take those things with her. So it was highly suspicious and unusual.
A month before Christy's disappearance, she and Danny were fighting so loudly that the neighbors called police.
The police department was then unable to determine who was the aggressor, so both of them at that time were arrested for domestic violence. Both of them had suffered injuries.
A check of Burlando's cell phone records indicated he called Christy's cell phone 78 times during the time she was missing.
Now been 24 hours since I talked to you last. I'm worried about you. Or there's a part of me that thinks that you're not okay.
The fact that he called her 78 times could be a way for him to create an alibi. A person might report someone missing, but nonetheless be involved in the commission of their murder, simply to cover their tracks or to appear that they're not involved.
Christy's parents and even police wondered whether Danny Burlando might have finally gone too far.
I told me, this guy stinks. They've had violence in the past between them. I don't like him. and I really wanted to look hard into this. And you had that gut feeling as both a police officer and as a parent, something really majorly wrong.
Christy Wilson went missing after a night of casino gambling. Since her stepfather was a local detective, police officers all over Southern California joined in the search.
San Jose Police Department had coordinated a very large search. Hundreds and hundreds of square miles was searched with vehicles on foot, by air, helicopter, airplane. There was an extensive search done both publicly and privately.
Christy's family was convinced she'd been the victim of foul play at the hands of her live-in boyfriend, Danny Burlando.
Most murderers probably dump somebody at a fairly short distance to where the crime would happen. And I felt so strongly that it was Danny. I literally searched his entire complex, close to his house, and the rivers around it.
Burlando seemed to be the only person with a motive to harm her.
There's a whole bunch of motives with a boyfriend. She was totally committed to being out of that relationship. This is, again, where I think is more of an abused woman, where she's drawn back into a relationship, even though she knows everything is bad for her there.
Burlando had a partial alibi for the night Christy disappeared. He was having dinner at his parents' house. But there were several hours he couldn't account for.
From approximately 11:30 at night, when his friend left him at his apartment, to the morning hours when he first used his cell phone, we don't have anybody with him to corroborate where he was.
Investigators asked the casino to review their security camera videotapes to see whether Christy was there on the night she disappeared.
They have approximately 700 plus cameras in the casino, both on the exterior and interior of the casino. We actually had her vehicle pulling in the parking lot. I had her entering the casino, and then we tracked her movement through the entire casino throughout the 6 hours that she was there.
The tape showed Christy playing blackjack. There were no signs that Danny Burlando was in the casino with her. Seated next to Christy at the blackjack table, however, was a stocky, dark-haired man.
You can see their interaction together. You can see when they would win, they would high-five. You can see him putting his arm around her as if he's trying to pick up on her, romancing her in some fashion.
The dealer said Christy was winning early, but as the night progressed, her luck started to change. They also said she was drinking, but not heavily.
A detective looked at the casino tape, and I believe he counted up to 17 separate sips of what appeared to be an alcoholic beverage over the course of the night. Doesn't sound like that much. She had a noticeable change in behavior towards the end of the evening.
Christy was a regular in the casino, but the employees found her behavior on this night to be out of character.
She being a real jerk at the time, from what I understand. And by watching her, I could only see her physical action, couldn't hear her words. I could see the way her body got rigid and how she had moved differently.
And some of the employees had discussed asking her to leave the casino.
But the man next to intervened.
The person of interest stepped in and said, "Hey, she'll be okay. I'll take care of her, whatever."
Fortunately, the security tapes provided a clue to the man's identity.
He had actually used his player's card playing a slot machine about 10 minutes before playing cards with Christy Wilson at the table.
With that player's cards, they can build credit and obtained complimentary items from the casino.
And so by charting that play and that particular slot machine, they were able to figure out who the individual was.
He was 53-year-old Mario Garcia, an executive with a healthcare computer company.
At one level, he didn't seem like a suspicious type, but when you've been in this business for a while, you just never know.
He got a six-figure income. He works for a very large company. He was managing a very large project for that company. He's married, had 2 children, was involved with his children. He played soccer and also was a soccer coach.
The security camera videotape showed that Christy and Garcia both left the casino at the same time, around 1 o'clock in the morning. The tapes also show Garcia left in his car alone. But Christy's car never moved.
She never went to her vehicle. She simply disappears in that parking lot.
Police now had two suspects in the disappearance of Christy Wilson. The first was her live-in boyfriend, Danny Burlando, who had no alibi for the early morning hours that Christy went missing.
His home was searched. His car was searched. He was scrutinized in great detail. His phone records were analyzed. His whereabouts and cell tower locations of use of his phone were analyzed. His computer was searched forensically and analyzed.
Police couldn't find any evidence linking Burlando to her disappearance. The other suspect was Mario Garcia, who was playing blackjack with Christy in the casino. Christy and Garcia left the casino at the same time, around 1 a.m.
It was the most important thing to find that person on the video. Without finding that information, we'd have no clue what happened, and we'd probably be assuming all our life, right to our dying day, that Danny was involved.
A background check revealed Mario Garcia had a shady past. 25 years earlier, he was arrested for kidnapping an ex-girlfriend.
He drove her to another location where he raped her in a vehicle. Then he took her inside and he raped her again inside. And at one point, he had stuck a gun in her mouth and pulled the trigger.
Fortunately, the gun wasn't loaded. Incredibly, Garcia was only charged with a misdemeanor and received probation. Garcia apparently had a problem with girlfriends. He was involved in a suspicious car accident with another girlfriend and her mother, who were both in Garcia's car when it veered into a river.
There were reports of people driving by seeing a car pull to the side of the road and then speed into the body of water, suspiciously. Mario Garcia was the sole survivor of the incident. His girlfriend, Lynette, washed ashore about a week later. Her mother was trapped in the car and drowned.
When police questioned Garcia about Christy Wilson's disappearance, he claimed he knew nothing about it. He said they walked to the parking lot together and each went their separate ways. The security cameras couldn't confirm this since they panned across the lot and weren't fixed. But Garcia's car had a unique feature, which provided a timeline for when he unlocked his car and when he drove away.
The lights on his Toyota Camry flashed 4 times. 4 times means that all 4 doors were open. There was a 3-minute and 41-second gap between the time he got in or unlocked the doors and he turns on the headlights to pull out. During that period of time, I believe that she was incapacitated in some fashion and probably laid in the back seat.
Garcia claimed he drove straight home. But if that were true, he drove out of the parking lot headed the wrong way.
The video footage showed that he had actually made a right turn out of the casino, which was the opposite direction he had indicated that he had went.
Furthermore, Garcia claimed he was home in bed all night until he left for work the next morning at 8:30. His wife refused to speak with police, but his cell phone records indicated he wasn't home at 8:30.
We were able to find that he had placed a phone call to his wife at 7:51 in the morning on her cell phone. It hit a cell tower that was located north of his residence.
Garcia also claimed he got to work in time for a 9 o'clock appointment, but his co-workers recalled he was late that morning, arriving closer to 10 a.m., and that his face was severely scratched.
First words that came out of his employees' mouth, some of the words were, who beat you up? I hope the other guy looks worse. It was very apparent immediately in the morning that he had injuries.
It was a significant fact that he had absolutely no injuries, observable injuries on him at the casino that night before.
Garcia told police the scratch marks were caused by yard work.
Like somebody smacked it under your arm. I had a little accident with the tractor in the tree. I got poison oak on my face.
It didn't seem plausible. I don't know of too many people that would be out trimming trees between 1:13 in the morning and, say, 8 o'clock in the morning when he's supposed to be ready and leaving for a meeting.
Connie Mitchell was asked to review the photographs of Garcia's injuries.
I'm a specialist in emergency medicine, and so, as anyone could imagine, we see lots of injuries.
Mitchell was particularly interested in the location of Garcia's injuries, the 4 parallel scratch marks on the left side of his chest and face.
The left side is sort of important here because if you have a right-handed victim, you'd be more likely that their right hand would decline across the left side in a struggle to get away.
Christy Wilson was right-handed, and the scratches had a uniform pattern, whereas an accident creates random scratches.
When you see a distinct geometric pattern, that, like the distinct pattern of the claw marks, don't make sense for a fall from a tree.
Mitchell was convinced that the scratch marks were caused by another person during a violent struggle.
Christy left a message for her loved ones, her family, investigators, police, forensic examiners to see.
Next, forensic experts searched Garcia's computer and found more incriminating evidence.
We learned that he had visited a website on forensic toxicology, forensic firearm evidence, and also a website on date rape drugs.
But if Mario Garcia was responsible for Christy's disappearance, investigators faced a serious hurdle. Without her body, they couldn't prove she was dead.
Not only did we not have a body, we had no confession, no witnesses. We didn't know where the murder happened. We didn't know what the murder weapon was.
The prime suspect in Christy Wilson's disappearance was Mario Garcia, who was with Christy in the casino earlier on the night she went missing. Investigators got a warrant to search Garcia's car, but it had already been cleaned inside and out. The floor mats and the trunk liner were gone.
So that right away was suspicious.
But cleaning, vacuuming, and even shampooing doesn't remove everything.
There was this brownish discoloration on the seat and just looked like a dirt stain, a dirty spot in the seat.
A presumptive test indicated this was blood, but the stain repellent on the seats prevented a DNA analysis.
I could not process it for DNA typing because there was an inhibitor present in the sample. And an inhibitor is something that prevents DNA typing from occurring.
Analysts also found traces of blood on the fibers of the seam between the seats and blood spatter on the passenger's side door.
Spatter was a result of some medium to high velocity incident that caused the spatter to have that kind of a look to it.
And they made another discovery. 2 strands of hair, one in the trunk and the other on the passenger's side door handle. DNA extracted from the hair in Mario's car matched the DNA of the hair on Christy's hairbrush.
The probability that a random, unrelated individual would have the profile found in the hairs was 1 in 720 quintillion for Caucasians.
But that wasn't all. The blood in Garcia's car was a mixture of Christy's and Garcia's, clear evidence of physical contact between them.
His statement to investigators was that she never got in his car.
Prosecutors believe this was a crime of opportunity. Garcia met Christy at the blackjack table, befriended her, and may have slipped a date rape drug into her drink, since casino employees noticed an abrupt change in her behavior. Shortly after 1 a.m., Christy and Garcia left the casino. Garcia unlocked his car, and for the next 3 minutes and 41 seconds, the cameras were pointed in a different direction. Prosecutors believe that's when Garcia slammed her head into the front passenger door, creating blood spatter and lodging a hair under the door handle. He forced Christy into the back seat and drove out of the casino parking lot without arousing suspicion. Garcia drove to an area somewhere north of his home, and there was most likely another altercation. They scratched and hit each other, leaving a mixture of their blood inside the car and marks on his face and chest. Garcia apparently put Christie's body in the trunk, and she left a single strand of hair behind. Garcia signaled his general location at 7:51 in the morning when he called his wife on his cell phone, proof that he wasn't home as he had claimed. Where he left Christie's body remains a mystery.
There's so many unsettling portions of this case, but that's one that is still unresolved and unsettling, is that the family is continued to be victimized by their inability to lay their daughter to rest, or at least lay the remains to rest.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Mario Flavio Garcia, guilty of felony as charged in count 1 of the information.
In January of 2007, Mario Garcia was tried and convicted of Christy Wilson's murder and was sentenced to 59 years in prison.
I am innocent. I did not kill Christy Wilson.
Forensics helped solve the case, but so did Christy Wilson.
Christy Wilson in this case was the silent witness. She was there at trial speaking into us the injuries that she left on Mario Garcia.
I think I said that in my family remarks to Mario at the end of the trial, that yes, you won, you killed her, but she left the marks that are going to put you in jail for the rest of your life and save some other woman.
Before we get back to the episode, if you're listening on Spotify, please take a moment to tap 5 stars. It's one of the easiest ways to support Forensic Tales and helps the show reach new listeners. Thank you so much for being here.
To get this episode of Forensic Tales ad-free, please visit patreon.com/Forensic Tales.
Forensic Tales discusses topics that some listeners may find disturbing. The contents of this episode may not be suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
On May 4th, 2001, Hollywood actor Robert Blake and his newly wedded wife, Bonnie Lee Bakley, dined together at a popular Italian restaurant in Los Angeles. But behind the glitz and glamour lies a haunting tale. Bonnie wanted fame and found herself in the limelight with a true Hollywood star. However, that fateful night took a dark turn. As Robert dashed back to the restaurant, 2 gunshots shattered the quiet of the night. What began as a fairy tale romance for Bonnie ended in a chilling act of murder. This is Forensic Tales, episode number 205, The Murder of Bonnie Lee Bakley. Welcome to Forensic Tales. I'm your host, Courtney Fretwell Areola. Forensic Tales is a weekly true crime podcast covering real, spine-tingling stories with a forensic science twist. Some cases have been solved with forensic science, while others have turned cold. Every remarkable story sends us a chilling reminder that not all stories have happy endings. As a one-woman show, your support helps me find new compelling cases, conduct in-depth fact-based research, and produce and edit this weekly show. You can support my work in 2 simple ways. Become a valued patron at patreon.com/Forensic Tales and leave a positive review. Before we get to this week's episode, we've got a new Patreon supporter that I want to thank. Thank you so much, Tiffany W., for supporting the show. Now, let's get to this week's episode. On the evening of May 4th, 2001, television and movie star Robert Blake and his new wife, Bonnie Lee Bakley, went on a dinner date. The 2 ate at Robert's favorite restaurant in Studio City, California, Vitello's, an Italian restaurant that Robert was said to like and go to so much that the restaurant named a pasta dish after him. So Robert ordered his favorite pasta dish and the couple sat in their regular booth in the back corner of the restaurant. Situated off Tujunga Avenue in Studio City, Vitello's is a popular Italian spot about 12 miles north of downtown Los Angeles and right near Hollywood. Vitello's is known to see its fair share of celebrities, especially Robert Blake, an actor who's been in over 90 movies and television shows throughout his career, including In Cold Blood and Beretta. After Robert and Bonnie finished eating dinner around 9:30 p.m., they walked back to Robert's car, which was parked about a block and a half away from the restaurant on a dark street near a construction site. Normally, Robert parked his car at the restaurant using their valet service. But for some reason, on that particular night, Robert decided to park about a block and a half away on a quiet and dark street. But before they got to the car, Robert told Bonnie to wait. He forgot his gun at the restaurant. He thought he left it sitting in their booth. So he told Bonnie to wait in the car for a couple of minutes. After that, Robert said he walked back to Vitello's and Bonnie got inside the car, where she sat in the passenger seat with the windows rolled down. By the time Robert said he got back to the car a few minutes later, his wife Bonnie was slumped over the center console, bleeding. The scene was drenched in blood. He wasn't sure what happened, but he knew it was bad. After that, Robert ran across the street and started banging on Sean Stanick's front door, someone who lived in Studio City directly across from the alley where Robert had parked his car. When Sean opened the door, he instantly recognized who it was, Robert Blake, aka the star from Beretta. Everyone knew Robert, but what did Robert need? Robert, who seemed hysterical, told Sean that he needed to use his phone to call 911. His wife had been attacked while sitting in their car and he needed help. This call was placed at 9:40 p.m., just about 10 minutes after they left the restaurant. Bonnie was transported to a local hospital but didn't make it, and she was pronounced dead at 10:15 p.m. She was shot twice, once in the right cheek and once in the right shoulder. At only 44 years old, Bonnie Lee Bakley was dead, leaving many people to wonder, including the LAPD, what could have happened in those few minutes. As detectives started working the scene, neighbors who lived in the nearby houses started to come out and watch what was happening. Not only did the scene draw attention because there was a murder, but you had a celebrity. This wasn't your typical Los Angeles murder. This involved a high-profile celebrity's wife who had been gunned down in cold blood. So everyone in the neighborhood wanted a sneak peek. Some of the neighbors said later on that Robert acted the part. He looked like a distraught husband who just found his wife shot to death. He was pacing back and forth on the sidewalk next to the car. He threw up. He looked like he even fainted at one point. He looked like a grieving husband. However, other witnesses interpreted Robert's behavior a little differently. He seemed hysterical and upset, but he's a professional actor after all, isn't he? Could this all just be an act? As soon as LAPD officers arrived on the scene, they began their homicide investigation. One of the first steps was to figure out what type of gun was used to shoot Bonnie. Robert told detectives that the gun he went back to the restaurant to get was a .38 Special Smith & Wesson revolver. But according to ballistic testing, that wasn't the type of gun used in the murder. So that particular gun could essentially be ruled out. Robert's gun wasn't what was used to kill Bonnie. But here's where the story gets interesting. When the police tested Robert's hands for gunshot residue that night, he reportedly tested positive for 5 consistent particles of gunshot residue. Now, this is a relatively small amount of particles to be found on someone who might have recently fired a gun. You usually see a lot more. So investigators point blank asked Robert, "Did you shoot and kill your wife?" And not surprisingly, Robert said absolutely not. He said he didn't even fire a gun that night, and he had no idea why he would have a small amount of GSR on his hands. Still, investigators made note of it. They couldn't exactly say how the GSR got on his hands. They just knew that he had some on him right after Bonnie was killed. LAPD officers headed straight to Vitello's. They wanted to speak with all of the employees who worked that night so they could verify Robert's story about going back to get his gun. But when they spoke to the employees, none of them remembered seeing Robert come back. They saw them having dinner together, but not even the busboy who cleaned the table right after they left remembered seeing Robert or his gun. So, did Robert lie about that part of the story? Or was it possible he did go back inside the restaurant that night and just no one saw him? The day after Bonnie was murdered, the police found the actual murder weapon. Inside a dumpster about a block and a half away from where Robert's car was parked, they found a German-made PPK pistol. They knew this had to be it because the bullet left inside perfectly matched the 2 bullets that killed Bonnie. Plus, it was found just a few feet away from where the shooting happened, so it all made sense. But when they tried to run the gun's serial number to see who it belonged to, the number had been burned off, so it was completely untraceable. On top of that, the gun had also been wiped with oil and dirt, essentially getting rid of any fingerprints. They weren't able to find anything on it. So from a forensic standpoint, the gun was basically useless. In the following weeks and months, people started to learn more about who Robert and Bonnie were and what kind of marriage or relationship they had or didn't have. Were they just an average couple who went out on a nice dinner date that night? Or was there something more? Robert Blake became one of the rare child stars who had a successful acting career as an adult. Years after playing one of the kids in the popular Our Gang series, also known as The Little Rascals, he starred in several television shows and movies as an adult. This included his role in the Oscar-nominated film In Cold Blood, where Robert played a career criminal. He also became well known for his role in Beretta. But as good as an actor he might have been on screen, he wasn't exactly as good off screen. In fact, many people who worked with Robert on different films and TV shows said he was extremely difficult to work with. He had a temper. He was angry all the time. Robert wasn't a friendly or easygoing person. So when it came to bookings, although he was talented, there was no question about that, producers and filmmakers sometimes passed up on Robert. Bonnie Lee Bakley, on the other hand, wasn't a successful Hollywood actress. In fact, she was the exact opposite. By the time she met Robert Blake, she was already a mother of 3 children and had been married 9 times, including a marriage to her first cousin. And yes, that means Robert was her 10th husband by the time she was killed. As an adult, Bonnie gained a reputation for being some sort of con artist. She usually supported herself and her family by selling nude photos of herself to lonely old men. But then she graduated to something else that made even more money. Placing ads in swinger magazines using different aliases to lure men into sending her money. If they responded, she would send some photos of herself. Later on, though, her cons became more elaborate. She began stealing credit cards and forging driver's licenses. And she was eventually convicted of fraud in 1998 and sentenced to 3 years of probation. Bonnie always had dreams of meeting a Hollywood star and marrying him. This dream became an obsession and one of her biggest goals in life. She finally achieved this when she met Robert Blake at a jazz club in 1999. The two had a one-night stand, and Robert thought he was never going to see her again. In June 2000, Bonnie gave birth to a baby girl whom she named Christian Shannon Brando, after Christian Brando, the eldest son of the actor Marlon Brando, whom she dated after when he was released from prison. So when Bonnie gave birth in 2000, she initially named Christian as the biological father. But later that fall, things got muddy, and the real father's identity became unclear. According to a taped phone call between Bonnie and Christian Brando, he started to deny that he was the father. Now, to be clear, Bonnie was the one secretly recording these phone calls. Christian had no idea they were being recorded. Christian warned Bonnie about her behavior during one of these recorded phone calls. Scamming all of these men was dangerous. Bonnie was making her living by scamming old rich men and sending nude photos, a business that she even coined Lonely Hearts. Christian Brando even told Bonnie, quote, "Someone out there might put a bullet in your head," end quote. Bonnie eventually started calling Robert Blake and told him that he was the father, not Christian Brando, and paternity tests ultimately proved that to be true. Robert Blake was in fact the father. So after that, Bonnie changed the baby's name to Rose Sophia Lenore Blake. And in November 2000, Bonnie and Robert got married. But was this marriage built on love or a far more sinister foundation? The story of a loveless marriage and a shocking murder thickens in the way you never imagined. We'll be right back. By all accounts, Robert and Bonnie didn't have your ordinary marriage. They weren't in love. They didn't live in the same house or even sleep in the same bed. She was actually living in one of Robert's guest houses. So it's unclear exactly why they even got married. Maybe it was because of the baby and Robert wanted to do the quote-unquote right thing. But it is clear that when Robert and Bonnie went out to dinner that night, they weren't madly in love. And according to the LAPD, Robert's original story about what happened started to fall apart. Besides the small traces of gunshot residue, the second biggest problem with Robert's story from that night was his gun. Remember, he said he had to go back to the restaurant to get his gun because he said he left it there. Well, many people questioned his story. Robert told the LAPD that he bought a gun for Bonnie's protection. Remember, she was known for being this con artist who took advantage of old, lonely men. This meant that she had received her fair share of death threats when they finally figured out that she was only stealing their money. So Robert said he started carrying around the gun in order to protect her. He was protecting his wife. Well, if that's the case, why did he leave Bonnie alone in the car while he jogged back to the restaurant to get it? Why wouldn't she go with him? Why would he leave her alone in the car? Or why not drive up in front of the restaurant, run in, grab the gun, and go home? It just didn't make any sense. Plus, no witnesses remembered seeing Robert return to the restaurant that night. Not even the busboy who cleaned the table up. He didn't see any gun in the booth. So, did he really go back and get it, like he said he did? Bonnie's murder quickly became a Hollywood story all on its own. A television and movie star's new young wife ends up shot to death at the same exact time he said he was going back to the restaurant to get his gun. They're married, but not in your traditional sense. Bonnie, the con artist, who might have had a string of guys out there who wanted to put a bullet in her head, a plot stranger than fiction. Throughout the investigation, the police considered several possible suspects, including Christian Brando, Bonnie's ex-boyfriend, and other men from her Lonely Hearts business. The LAPD worked the case up and down. They reviewed over 900 pieces of evidence, conducted over 150 interviews, and nothing. That is, until they learn of two stuntmen. According to these two former stuntmen, Robert tried to hire them to kill Bonnie months before it happened. One is a guy named Gary McLarty, and the other is Ronald Hamilton, who went by the nickname Duffy. According to Gary McLarty, Robert had offered him $10,000 to be a hitman and, quote, pop Bonnie while she either slept or while at a restaurant. According to Duffy, he and Robert met at least 4 different times to talk about killing Bonnie. They even drove around together in the same exact area where Bonnie was eventually shot and killed, right near Vitello's. Records from a prepaid phone card showed that Robert had contacted the two stuntmen dozens of times in the weeks leading up to the murder. He also made a bank withdrawal of $25,000 to pay for the alleged hit. But before the police could move in and arrest a star like Robert Blake, they needed a motive. Why would Robert Blake want Bonnie Lee Bakley dead? Well, the reason might be pretty straightforward. Robert felt trapped by Bonnie. He didn't want to be married to her. He only did it because of the biological daughter they had together. And he thought his life would be easier for both him and his daughter if Bonnie was out of their lives. And basically, he wanted no part of her life. So, if he didn't pull the trigger that night, maybe he had someone else do it. After months and months of investigating, the LAPD finally zeroed in on their prime suspect. Robert Blake was arrested on April 18th, 2002. The police also arrested Robert's part-time bodyguard, Earl Caldwell, who they charged as his co-conspirator in the murder. At first, the police believed that while Robert was plotting the murder, Earl Caldwell supplied him with a gun and a list of other supplies that he would need to commit the murder. This included 2 shovels, duct tape, and swimming pool acid. But all of the criminal charges against him were eventually dropped. Now the only one behind bars, Robert was ultimately charged with 1 count of murder with special circumstances, 2 counts of solicitation of murder, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder. The 1 count of murder with special circumstances meant that LA prosecutors could seek the death penalty. But early on, prosecutors expressed no interest in the death penalty. Instead, they wanted to seek life in prison if he was ultimately convicted. Robert would remain in LA's Men's Central Jail facility for the next year, all while maintaining his innocence. Since the judge ordered no bail in the case, he had no choice but to sit in jail and wait. But in March 2003, the judge finally granted his bail and set it at $1.5 million. And Robert was allowed to go home on house arrest while he awaited his trial. By the time the trial started in December 2004, it had become one of the biggest trials of the century, second only to the O.J. Simpson one back in 1995. The entire thing was a media circus. But unlike the O.J. Simpson murder trial, the judge only allowed part of the trial to be televised on TV, like the opening and closing statements as well as the verdict. Everything else during the trial wasn't allowed to be televised. But despite the viewing restrictions, the trial was closely followed by millions of people. Everyone wanted to see if someone as big and famous as Robert Blake could be found guilty of murdering his own wife. The prosecutor's star witnesses were the 2 stuntmen who said that Robert tried to hire both of them to kill Bonnie. But when neither of them agreed to kill her, the prosecution said Robert decided to pull the trigger himself. Prosecutors pointed to the forensic evidence, which they said proved their case. One key piece of physical evidence at the trial was the gunshot residue particles found on Robert's clothing immediately after the shooting. Typically, the presence of GSR suggests that someone recently fired a gun. And that's exactly what the prosecution was alleging. The GSR on Robert's clothing that night proved he was the shooter. But was it that simple? The officers who first arrived on the scene only found about 4 to 5 particles that were consistent with GSR on Robert's hands, a tiny amount for someone accused of recently firing a gun. According to an article by CNN, the police also found GSR on Robert's clothing, including a pair of black leather boots, a black cotton t-shirt, Levi's blue jeans, a turquoise belt buckle, and a pair of black socks. The prosecution alleged that Robert had wiped away most of the GSR before the cops got there and did the GSR test about 2.5 hours after the shooting. They said he was wiping his hands on everything: the dirt on the ground, the curb, the seats in the back of the patrol car. So that was plenty of time to clean up, according to the prosecution. And that could explain why there was so little GSR found on him about 2.5 hours later. They might have found a lot more if they had done the test earlier, not almost 3 hours later. However, according to a defense expert, the gunshot residue doesn't mean that Robert killed Bonnie. Stephen Dowell, a criminalist with the LA County Department of Coroner, testified that Robert could have picked up the GSR from guns that weren't the murder weapon, including his own personal gun he had with him that night, or even other guns from his house. Dowell also testified that GSR is sticky. It can be easily transferred from one surface to another. It can also stick to someone's clothing for years, so it doesn't necessarily mean that someone recently fired a gun. For instance, if Robert had recently been to a shooting range, which we know he probably did because he owned several guns at the time, GSR might still have been found on his boots, even if he hadn't fired a gun in days or weeks. It could have just been left over from a recent trip to a shooting range. Dowell even testified to the type of particles he found on Robert's clothing. He said that on Robert's black leather boots, he found, quote, only one highly specific particle of gunshot residue on them, along with, quote, several consistent particles, end quote. He testified that the majority of particles contained only one lead and not the other components of gunshot residue, and actually could have come from something entirely different, not even a gun. The defense next examined Robert's personal gun, the .38 Smith & Wesson. They argued that GSR may have been transferred to Robert's hands and clothing simply by handling his own gun. Remember, we're only talking about 4 to 5 particles of GSR on Robert's hands, a tiny, tiny amount. So the defense argued the particles could have simply come from handling his own gun or even the holster used to carry it. There was also talk during the trial that the police might have mishandled the clothes that Robert wore that night. The defense argued that after Robert turned over his clothes to investigators, they were all put together in the same box. They were then driven around in the back of a patrol car inside the trunk for at least 2 days and were surrounded by firearms before they were taken to the police station and put into evidence. So the defense said this could have led to contamination. And if the clothes were contaminated, then the GSR found on them couldn't be trusted. So if the defense argued that 5 particles is a tiny amount for someone who recently fired a gun, what is the typical amount you'd expect to see? Well, the answer to that question might depend on who you ask. According to the state, 5 is enough to say that Robert is a killer. But if you ask the defense, they say it isn't. One of their experts testified that if Robert had actually shot and killed Bonnie, he should have had at least 100 GSR particles on his hands, not the 4 or 5 the prosecution and defense claimed. So the real answer to that question was left up to the jury to decide. They had to determine which forensic expert they believed more, the state or the defense. Next was the question of blood on Robert Blake's clothing, or the lack of blood. One expert at the trial testified that they couldn't find a single drop of blood on Robert's clothing that night. Even when luminol was sprayed on the clothes, they found nothing. But the prosecution's key blood expert, Rod Englert, a crime scene reconstructionist, said there wouldn't be any blood on Robert's clothing. The lack of blood simply didn't mean anything, and Robert was still the likely shooter. According to the prosecution's expert, for blood to get on Robert's clothing, he would have had to be standing right over her when she was shot. But based on the autopsy, the medical examiner believed Bonnie was shot from 1 to 2 feet away. That was based on the 2 gunshot wounds themselves and the blood that was found inside the car and on Bonnie's clothing. The medical examiner believed that Bonnie raised one of her arms when she was being shot, and the blood found on the passenger side door and the window was consistent with the shooter being at least 1 to 2 feet away. The blood patterns also showed where the shooter was standing when he shot Bonnie. He was likely standing outside of the car and shot through the open window. Bonnie likely saw her killer pointing the gun at her and leaned to her left towards the driver's side in a classic defensive position. Based on how her body was found, she was probably shot in the head first and in the shoulder second. The prosecution's expert also testified that when Bonnie was shot, the blood spatter only traveled about 8.5 inches away from her body. According to the expert, this type of high-velocity mist is very light and fine, so it usually never travels more than 4 feet away from the bullet's point of entry. This, again, explains why the prosecution believes the shooter wouldn't have gotten any blood on him, and why Robert didn't have a speck of blood on him. But the defense also used this point to support their own case. They had their own set of experts testify that if he was in fact the shooter, he should have gotten at least some of Bonnie's blood on him. If the shooter was standing right outside the passenger side window, as the medical examiner has stated, he should have gotten at least a drop of blood on him. But again, there was nothing. The murder weapon was also front and center at trial. The day after Bonnie was killed, the LAPD found the gun in a dumpster about 1.5 blocks away. They knew it was the gun used in the shooting because it still had 1 bullet left. So when the bullet was compared to the 2 bullets used to kill Bonnie, they were a match. However, investigators were never able to find any forensic or physical evidence on the gun. The serial number had been burned off, making it impossible to trace the gun's origin or even find out who owned it. Oil and dirt had been rubbed all over it, destroying any possible fingerprints, so the gun was essentially useless for the prosecution. But for the defense, the murder weapon was really important. It was yet another piece of physical evidence linked to the murder that didn't have any connection to Robert Blake. His fingerprints weren't on it. He didn't own that type of gun or have any similar weapons registered under his name, so there was absolutely no connection there. If Robert had used it in the murder, he would have had to lure Bonnie back to the car, shoot her with it, then run about 1.5 blocks away to get rid of it inside a dumpster. Now, that's definitely possible, and it's definitely doable, but the prosecution didn't have the forensic evidence to be able to prove that. No one else was ever linked to the gun either. Not any of the men conned by Bonnie throughout her business, not Christian Brando, not anyone else. There was some speculation that Robert's part-time bodyguard, Earl Caldwell, who we talked about a little bit earlier, might have had some connection to that gun. But they never found any solid evidence proving that theory. Whoever bought and owned that particular gun is still a complete mystery. The prosecution's theory that Robert asked 2 of his former stuntmen to help commit the murder also had its set of problems. One of the stuntmen was an admitted meth user, or he had used meth in the past. So the defense basically destroyed his credibility in front of the jury. The son of the other stuntmen testified that his father had told him that Robert was going to pay him not to shoot Bonnie, but to protect them from a potential stalker they had. So his credibility was also trashed. The defense argued that no forensic evidence existed that linked Robert to the murder. None of his fingerprints were found on the murder weapon. The untraceable gun found in the dumpster the day after the murder. None of Bonnie's blood was found on any of his clothing. And only 5 particles consistent with GSR were found on his hands, which his defense team argued could have come from something else entirely, completely unrelated to the murder. So without a single shred of forensic evidence, could the jury convict Robert Blake of first-degree murder? What's on the jury's mind? With no forensic evidence, is motive enough to convict? We'll be right back. On March 16th, 2005, the jury found Robert Blake not guilty. Not guilty of murder, not guilty of solicitation, not guilty of anything. The jury believed there wasn't enough evidence to say whether he hired someone to kill Bonnie or he killed her himself. In this case, there wasn't much scientific proof, like fingerprints or DNA. Even though the person seemed guilty, that's not enough to prove it. The prosecution usually needs some type of forensic evidence to say for sure, but we just didn't see that here. But because Robert Blake was found not guilty during his criminal trial, that didn't mean his legal troubles were done. Just a few years later, he was found liable for Bonnie's death during a civil trial that her family initiated. The court ordered Robert to pay Bonnie's family $30 million, a judgment that would ultimately send him into bankruptcy. So what happened to Bonnie and Robert's daughter, Rose? Well, after her father's criminal trial, she went to live with some other family members who raised her. So if Robert really did murder Bonnie because he wanted custody of Rose all to himself, that entire plan backfired. Because after he was arrested, Rose was raised by other relatives, and she didn't speak to her father for years. And according to an article by NPR, she called him Robert, not Dad. Now you've got 2 entirely different verdicts. The criminal courts found Robert not guilty, but the civil courts found him liable for Bonnie's death. So which one is it? Did Robert Blake murder Bonnie Lee Bakley? For many people, Robert is a guilty man, a man who got away with murder. If he didn't pull the trigger himself that night, he hired someone to do his dirty work. Many people believe he was the only person out there with a strong enough motive to want Bonnie dead. And it's disappointing that there wasn't enough forensic evidence at trial to send him to prison. But for Robert's supporters, he's an innocent man who's been wrongfully accused by the court of public opinion. They believe the jury made the right decision based on the forensic evidence they heard during the trial. 2 starkly different opinions and 2 completely different interpretations of the forensic evidence. Now it's your turn. What do you think happened to Bonnie Lee Bakley? And who murdered her? Send me your thoughts. And don't forget that the show's patrons will hear my thoughts on this infamous case right here at patreon.com/forensictales. To share your thoughts on the story, be sure to follow the show on Instagram and Facebook. To find out what I think about the case, sign up to become a patron at patreon.com/forensictales. After each episode, I release a bonus episode where I share my personal thoughts and opinions about the case. Don't forget to subscribe to Forensic Tales so you don't miss an episode. We release a new episode every Monday. If you love the show, consider leaving us a positive review or tell friends and family about us. You can also help support the show through Patreon. Thank you so much for joining me this week. Please, join me next week. We'll have a brand new case and a brand new story to talk about. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings. Forensic Tales is a Rockefeller audio production. The show is written and produced by me, Courtney Fretwell Areola. For a small monthly contribution, you can help create new compelling cases for the show, help fund research, and assist with production and editing costs. For supporting the show, you'll become one of the first to listen to new ad-free episodes and snag exclusive show merchandise not available anywhere else. To learn about how you can support the show, head over to our Patreon page, patreon.com/forensictales, or simply click the support link in the show notes. You can also support the show by leaving a positive review or telling friends and family about us. Forensic Tales is a podcast made possible by our Patreon producers, Tony A., Nicole G., Christine B., Karen D., Nancy H., Sherry A., Michael D., Nicola, Jerry M., Brian W., Natasha K., Jerry L., and Megan G. If you'd like to become a producer of the show, head over to our Patreon page or send me an email at courtney@forensictales.com to find out how you can become involved. For a complete list of sources used in this episode, please visit forensictales.com. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings. Before we get back to the episode, if you're listening on Spotify, please take a moment to tap 5 stars. It's one of the easiest ways to support Forensic Tales and helps the show reach new listeners. Thank you so much for being here.
To get this episode of Forensic Tales ad-free, check us out at patreon.com/forensictales.
Forensic Tales discusses topics that some listeners may find disturbing. The contents of this episode may not be suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
March 31st, 2006, Brian celebrated another round of intense medical school finals. Another huge step closer to achieving his dreams. On the horizon, spring break with the love of his life. He and his friends drank the night away on that fateful April Fool's Eve. The celebratory night ended quietly. But the following morning, April Fool's, 2006, Brian vanished. Can someone disappear without a trace? This is Forensic Tales, episode number 106, The Mysterious Disappearance of Brian Schaefer. Welcome to Forensic Tales. I'm your host, Courtney Fretwell Areola. Forensic Tales is a weekly true crime podcast covering real, spine-tingling stories with a forensic science twist. Some cases have been solved with forensic science, while others have turned cold. Every remarkable story sends us a chilling reminder that not all stories have happy endings. Sharing true crime stories isn't just about the story themselves. It's about getting justice for the victims and their families. True crime helps hold criminals accountable so they can't continue to cause us harm. As a one-woman show, your support helps me find new exciting cases, conduct in-depth, fact-based research, produce and edit this weekly show. And for supporting the show, you'll get early access to ad-free episodes, exclusive merchandise not available anywhere else, bonus content, shout-outs in episodes, and priority on case suggestions. To learn more about supporting Forensic Tales, consider visiting our Patreon page at patreon.com/forensictales, or simply click the support link in the show notes. You can also support the show by leaving us a positive rating with a review. Now, let's jump right into this week's story. On March 31st, 2006, April Fool's Eve, 27-year-old Ohio State University med student Brian Schaefer met up with his dad for dinner. It was a Friday night and the start of spring break, which meant that Brian had the entire next week off from classes. The plan that night was to spend some quality time with his dad, Randy, at a steak dinner to celebrate the start of spring break. And then after dinner, Brian was going to go meet up with some of his friends. At dinner, Brian seemed a little stressed out. He told his dad that he was exhausted from pulling all-nighters and cramming for his midterms. Sounds like a nightmare to me. Randy told his son that he didn't think he should go out after dinner. He looked exhausted and thought that it would be better for his son just to stay in and get some rest. But Brian didn't listen. It was a Friday night, the start of a week off from med school. He just wanted to go out and have some drinks with friends. Around 9 p.m., Brian finished dinner with his dad and met up with his friend and former roommate, William Florence, a.k.a. Clint. Brian and Clint had plans to go on a bar crawl on the southern campus of Ohio State. They wanted to have some fun and just blow off steam from their spring midterms. After sharing some drinks at the first couple of stops, they ran into one of Clint's friends, Meredith Reed. The three of them ended up making their way to the Ugly Tuna Saloona, a popular bar in Columbus University District. Slightly after 10 p.m., Brian picked up his phone and called his girlfriend, Alexis Wagoner. Brian told Alexis he loved her and that he was looking forward to their upcoming trip to Miami. Alexis, also a medical student, was at her parents' home in Toledo and was excited to visit Miami with Brian just a few days later. After talking with Alexis on the phone, Brian returned to Clint and Meredith. The trio continued drinking and taking shots at the Ugly Tuna. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, the bar was preparing to close. They flashed the lights on throughout the building in typical bar fashion, letting everyone know, hey, the bar's closing, time to go home. Once the lights flashed on, Meredith and Clint quickly realized that Brian wasn't with them. They decided to look around the bar and see if they could find him. Maybe he's in the restroom, or perhaps he's somewhere else talking with someone that he met up with. But after checking the men's restroom and looking for him everywhere, they can't find him. Thinking that maybe Brian decided to leave on his own, they also went home. The following day, Brian's girlfriend Alexis woke up excited about their upcoming trip to Miami. She tried calling Brian to confirm a few details about the trip, but he didn't answer. It wasn't like him not to answer his phone, so she called again, and still no answer. Alexis thought that Brian probably had a little too much to drink at the bars and that he was probably just sleeping off a nasty hangover. Later that morning, Brian's dad, Randy, decided to go over to his apartment. When he arrived, he didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Brian's car was parked in the driveway, his bed was made, everything looked normal, and everything looked neat inside. Except Brian wasn't home. Randy tried calling his cell phone a few times, but no luck. So he called his other son, Derek, to see maybe if Derek knew where Brian was. But Derek didn't know where Brian was. He hadn't heard from him. Throughout the rest of the weekend, no one heard from Brian. He wasn't answering his phone, and no one was at his apartment. Finally, on Monday morning, Brian didn't show up to meet his girlfriend at the airport. He missed their flight to Miami. 48 hours after Brian was last seen, the police issued a missing person report. Brian Schaefer grew up in a small suburb just outside of Columbus, Ohio. His parents, Randy and Renee Schaefer, raised Brian and his younger brother, Derek, in just your all-typical American household. From an early age, they could tell Brian had a bright future ahead of him. After graduating high school in 1997, Brian was accepted to Ohio State University, where he received his bachelor's degree in microbiology. After graduation, he stuck around Ohio State and was accepted into their med school program. Although Brian wanted to become a doctor, he always told his friends that his real ambition in life was to be a rock star. During his time in med school at Ohio State, he met his girlfriend and fellow med student, Alexis. Right from the get-go, Brian and Alexis just hit it off. They were both really easygoing, they shared mutual interest, and together they just made a really great couple. Both families believed that Brian was planning to propose to Alexis on that upcoming Miami trip during spring break, the trip that Brian never made. A few weeks before Brian's disappearance, his mom, Renee, passed away from a rare form of bone cancer in March of 2006. Renee's death was crushing. He was super close to his mom. Her tragic loss occurred during the middle of his second year of med school. Renee, who worked as a nurse, was Brian's inspiration. He wanted to follow in her footsteps. He wanted to become a doctor. On the outside, Brian kept his guard up around his friends. Even though he appeared to be handling his mom's death okay, on the inside, he was hurting. As soon as Columbus police filed a missing person report on Brian, an all-hands-on-deck search began. In the beginning, up to 50 police officers were assigned to help search. They knew this was entirely out of character for someone like Brian, so the need to find him quickly intensified. Everyone began stapling missing person posters all around town. The police spoke with everyone who was at the Ugly Tuna Saloon that night. Investigators brought in cadaver dogs to try and pick up any body scent in the area. But nothing seemed to turn up. Brian was nowhere to be found. Detectives got their hands on the surveillance footage from cameras in and around the Ugly Tuna bar. When they combed through the tapes, they got their first big break in the case. At 1:15 a.m., the bar's surveillance cameras captured Brian and his friends Clint and Meredith going up an escalator to the bar's second-story main entrance. In the video, you can see all three of them walking together, and it's clear that Brian is still at the bar at 1:15 a.m. A little over 30 minutes later, another camera captured Brian at 1:55 a.m. just outside of the bar. In the video, you can see Brian, and it looks like he's chatting with two females. A few minutes later, you see him simply walk off camera back in the direction of the bar's entrance. Even though the camera doesn't capture it, it does look like Brian was headed back inside of the bar. Now, this was the last time he was ever seen. Although a camera captured Brian and his friends entering the bar, and another camera saw him what looked like him chatting to a couple of females outside of the Ugly Tuna, no camera captured him ever leaving that night. Just after 2 a.m., a video captured Clint and Meredith leaving the bar, but Brian wasn't with them. Here's where things get even stranger, okay? After combing through the videotapes for hours, the police determined that every single person entering the Ugly Tuna bar that night was accounted for. They could determine when every single person entered and when they left the bar. Everyone was accounted for. Everyone except for Brian Schaefer. He was never seen leaving through any of the bar's entrances. It was like he completely vanished after stepping back inside of the bar only a few minutes before closing time. Investigators working on Brian's case started to develop different theories to explain why cameras caught him entering the bar but not leaving. One of these early theories was that maybe he disguised himself before leaving the bar, whether that was changing clothes or possibly just covering his face and head, like a hat maybe. And then he simply just snuck out by walking out with a group of people who were also leaving. Remember, this all happened at closing time. It's 2:00 in the morning. So there's going to be a lot of people walking out of the bar's front door at the same time that Brian would have left that night. But there's a couple problems with this early on theory. Number one, the police accounted for every person coming and leaving the bar that night, every single person. So if Brian disguised himself, if he threw on a hat or maybe changed clothes, then that would have left at least one person unaccounted for. Number two, another problem with this theory. Brian is a pretty identifiable guy. He's described as being 6'2", 160, 170 pounds, and he has this distinctive Pearl Jam tattoo on one of his biceps. So he's not exactly someone who is just going to blend in easy. A guy who's 6'2" is typically going to stand out in a crowd. And then number three, the third problem with this early on theory, and to me at least is the most troubling. Why would Brian want to disguise himself? Another theory was that Brian used another exit from the bar, not the bar's main entrance. Besides the front, the Ugly Tuna Saloona also had a back exit. Now, this wasn't a door that the public was allowed to use. This door is an emergency exit door located in the back of the bar. But there's also a problem with this theory. The police learned that the rear exit of the place led to a huge, extensive construction site. So not only would Brian, A, have to know where this back door is, but B, once he got outside of this door that he would have to know was there, he would have to navigate this massive construction zone. The entire area behind the Ugly Tuna was under construction. So it's not like he could have just opened the door and then walked out. Sure, it's possible. He's a 27-year-old grown adult. He could have probably found his way out of a construction zone. But let's not forget that Brian was drinking that night. According to his friend and former roommate Clint, who he was with that night, they took at least one shot of alcohol at every bar they went to. So it's pretty fair to say that by the time this trio got to the Ugly Tuna Saloona, that Brian would have been drunk. He would have been very drunk. But if Brian didn't leave through the front or back door, how did he get out of the bar? Detectives began combing through security cameras all around the Ugly Tuna. Lucky for the Columbus police, there was no shortage of security cameras in the area. But the search didn't turn anything up. There wasn't a single camera that captured Brian, not even the security camera set up in the construction site right behind the Ugly Tuna. The only one that was right up against the bar's back door, again, it was like Brian was a complete ghost. With no evidence to suggest that he was a victim of foul play, the Columbus police couldn't rule out the possibility that maybe he simply ran away. He wanted to escape the pressure of med school. He was grieving the sudden loss of his mom. Maybe he just up and left. But from day one of the investigation, Brian's family insisted that no, he didn't run away. He couldn't run away. He wouldn't run away. To them, he had no reason to run away. Despite the loss of his mom, the sudden loss, he had everything going for him. He was doing well in school. He had a girlfriend who, by all accounts, he adored. They had a trip planned to Miami a few days later, a trip that many people in Brian's life thought that maybe he was going to propose to Alexis. So why would he simply run away? Let's discuss Brian's bank records. So following April 1st, there's been zero activity on his credit cards, bank accounts, or cell phone. So if Brian Schaefer decided to run away, he did so without using any of his accounts and without accessing any of his money. But what about his cell phone? Well, the cell phone is mysterious. So Brian's girlfriend, Alexis, called his phone every day throughout the investigation. She would simply pick up her phone, call him in hopes of having him answer one day. She wanted him to answer and tell her that everything was okay. Every time she called his cell phone, it would go straight to voicemail. Until one night in September when she called. At this particular time in September, instead of going straight to voicemail, it rang 3 times before going to his voicemail. Now, later on, Brian's cell phone company said that there may have been a computer glitch in their system, which could explain why the phone rang 3 times. There's no evidence to suggest that anyone ever turned the cell phone back on. But then there's the cell phone GPS. Even though Brian's cell phone was not GPS enabled, the police couldn't determine its location. However, the cell phone did ping off a cell phone tower 14 miles away from Columbus, 14 miles away from where Brian was last seen and heard from at the Tuna Saloona. The police immediately brought in Brian's 2 friends, Clint and Meredith, for questioning. They were with Brian that night, so naturally, Policing 101 says that they're going to be the first people that they're going to want to speak to and to interview. So the police asked both of them if they would be willing to submit a polygraph test. Even though they weren't considered possible suspects in Brian's disappearance, a polygraph test would officially rule them out so that then the police could move on to other potential suspects. So about a month into the search for Brian, he'd been missing now for about 4 weeks, Meredith Reed sat down and passed her polygraph test and was officially cleared. But the other friend and Brian's former roommate, Clint Florence, wasn't as cooperative. Instead of agreeing to take a polygraph test, he hired an attorney and refused to participate. So this is a little weird, right? Clint is supposed to be one of Brian's good friends, their former dorm roommates from college. You would think that he would want to do anything and everything to help find his missing friend and help the police conduct their investigation. Now, I'm not exactly sure what's going on here, but when your friend goes missing, you're the last one to see him, and you decide to lawyer up and not answer any of the police's questions, well, that's going to raise some eyebrows, right? There's this common misconception that only guilty people hire attorneys. It's like, if you've got nothing to hide, why tell the police to speak to your attorney? Why not just sit down with detectives and tell your side of the story? Again, if you're innocent, what are you so worried about? Now, I do think it's always a smart idea to get legal help or advice when faced with a situation like this. Anytime you're going to sit down and be interviewed by the police, you do want to make sure you know what you're doing. And of course, you want to know what your rights are. But in this case, from what I understand at least, it's a little odd that Clint lawyered up so quickly and that he refused to talk. If it were me and I was in Clint's shoes and Brian was my good friend, I know I would be doing everything to help find my missing friend. I would talk to the police. I would take a polygraph test if I had nothing to hide. I would certainly be doing everything I can to help this investigation. But from what we know, that's not exactly what Clint did. He also refused to take that polygraph test. Now, I do want to stop there for just a second because I am bothered that he lawyered up as quickly as he did, and it is a little odd that he stopped cooperating with the police. But as far as not taking the polygraph test, I'm not quite as bothered by that. The reason why is because I'm skeptical of polygraph tests. I know I've talked about this in previous episodes, but I think polygraphs can be problematic. There's a reason why they aren't admissible in court as evidence in a criminal trial. People can fail a polygraph even when they're being 100% honest. I think they're a good tool. I think they're a good investigative tool. But personally, I don't put too much weight in them. Clint probably told his lawyer that the Columbus police wanted him to take a polygraph, and it was probably his lawyer who told him not to. Now, Clint can refuse to speak to the police, and he can refuse to take a polygraph, but that's going to mean that some people will speculate that he had something to do with Brian's disappearance. They're going to wonder why his close friend won't help in the investigation, especially if he's one of the last people to see him. Now, there are rumors and reports that Brian and Clint got into an argument at the Ugly Tuna that night. There are also rumors that Clint may have helped Brian disappear and voluntarily walk away from his life. In an interview with reporters, Brian's younger brother, Derek, told reporters that something seemed, quote, off about Clint. He said, quote, the way he talked about my brother after he went missing, kind of in a negative way, I wouldn't expect that from someone whose friend vanished, end quote. Columbus police continued to search for Brian over the next 2 years. With zero activity on his cell phone and bank accounts, the hope of finding him alive started to fade. By 2009, Clint's attorney, Neil Rosenberg, sent a message to Don Corbett, a private investigator working on the case. In the email, Neil Rosenberg, again, this is Clint's private attorney, Neil Rosenberg seemed to suggest that he and his client Clint believed that Brian was still alive, even 2 years later. In his email, which is dated September 22nd, 2008, Clint's attorney wrote, quote, if Brian is alive, which is what I'm led to believe after speaking with a detective involved, then it is Brian and not Clint who is causing his family pain and hardship. Brian should come forward and end this, end quote. Wow. Okay, let's unpack that statement. This attorney claims to have information from detectives working on the case that Brian is still alive in 2009, 2 years later. Or, again, still alive. So, which detective allegedly gave him this information? Who told this private attorney, Neil Rosenberg, that they believe and that the police are operating under the assumption that Brian Shaffer is A-OK? Well, the Columbus police have never said that they ever told Neil Rosenberg that they think that Brian is still alive. And according to Don Corbett, the private investigator who was hired to help the Shaffer family, he looked into this. He spoke with every single detective who has ever worked Brian Shaffer's case, and he couldn't find one detective who ever said that they spoke to Neil Rosenberg telling him that they believe Brian is alive. Now, Neil Rosenberg, this private attorney, declined to discuss the email or his claims about Brian being alive in any interview since then with reporters. Over the years, Brian's father, Randy, searched for his son. He never gave up hope that he would find him alive. In a sad, sad twist of fate, Randy was killed before discovering what happened to his son. He searched for answers until his sudden death in September of 2008. 2 years after Brian's disappearance, Randy was found dead outside of his Baltimore home after a tree fell and fatally struck him during a heavy windstorm. Neighbors found his body the following day, and he was pronounced dead. The Shaffer family set up a condolence book online following Randy's death. It was meant to be a platform where people who knew and loved Randy could come online and sign a digital book. Well, instead of attracting family and friends, it also attracted internet trolls. One of the book's signatures read, "To Dad, love Brian," in parentheses, U.S. Virgin Islands. When the news first broke about this post, everyone wondered, is that the real Brian Shaffer? Did he just find out about his dad's sudden death and then decide that it was time to reach out? Not exactly, because after looking into the post and the IP address, the police discovered that someone had created the post on a computer in Franklin County. It turned out to be just some sick internet troll pretending to be Brian. After Randy's death, the Columbus Police Department continued to receive tips in the case, but none of the information led to any significant break in the investigation. Since it had been over 2 years with zero activity on Brian's cell phone and bank accounts, it seemed more likely that foul play was involved. Brian didn't simply walk away from his life. Unfortunately, sometime after leaving the Ugly Tuna, something bad happened. But who would want to harm Brian? One theory swirling around the internet is that he was a victim of a serial killer. Internet sleuths and true crime bloggers began speculating if Brian had become a victim of the smiley face killer, a serial killer whose MO was to murder intoxicated young men by drowning them, and then spray paint a smiley face somewhere near the victim's body. Now, we know that 27-year-old Brian Schaefer was drunk that night, the smiley killer's prime target. But there are a couple problems with this theory. One, we aren't sure the smiley face killer even exists. We don't know if there's one person or a few copycat type killers. Number two, the 40 or so victims possibly linked to the smiley face killer aren't confirmed, meaning we know about 40 cases, but law enforcement can't say beyond a reasonable doubt if all of them are smiley face victims. And then number three, even though Brian fit the victim profile, intoxicated young male, the police never found his body in any nearby bodies of water. They never found his signature, the spray-painted smiley face, anywhere. So it might be a good theory, at least a good one to talk about on the internet, but it's not strong enough for the authorities to continue to investigate, because in 2008, the FBI officially ruled out the theory of the smiley face killer. In 2014, this is now 8 years into the investigation, Columbus police announced that they still received at least 2 tips per month about Brian's whereabouts. Most of the tips come in through the Crime Stoppers hotline. So although none of the tips have led anywhere, it is promising to know that tips are continuing to come in even after all of these years. The most significant tip to come in was in 2019, 13 years later. The tip was about a possible sighting of Brian in Mexico. So an image of a homeless man living in Tijuana who resembled Brian began circulating on the internet. This was the first break in years, and it looked promising. The guy was around Brian's height, around his age, and around his weight, and to be honest, the guy looks like him. Even though it was hard to tell because it had been over 13 years and the man was homeless, but it was enough for law enforcement to send the image of the man over to the FBI. When the FBI received the image, they conducted what is known as a facial recognition analysis. While the FBI tested it, everyone was on pins and needles, waiting to find out, is this Brian Schaefer? And it kept the hope alive that maybe he did run away and maybe he is still alive. He somehow got out of the club without detection, and he's now living in Mexico. But unfortunately, when the FBI's facial recognition test came back, it wasn't the result we all hoped for. The homeless man living in Tijuana, Mexico, may have looked like him, but it wasn't Brian. The latest update in the case came in March of 2021. In March of last year, the Ohio Attorney General's Bureau of Criminal Investigation and the Columbus Division of Police released an age progression photo of Brian, and they openly pleaded with the public for its help. Forensic sketch artists have been recreating age progressions for years, whether they're hand-drawn or created on a computer. I think the first time many of us saw these age progressions in forensics was while watching the popular television show America's Most Wanted. We all know the show. Each week, new fugitives were presented in hopes that someone would recognize the suspect and then turn them over to the police. In 2008, the show captured its 1,000th featured criminal through the use of a forensic sketch artist and age progressions. Since then, age progressions have been used for much more than just identifying fugitives. It's also been used in cases of missing person investigations. We see it a lot when children go missing, and it's been 10, 15, or 20 years, and then a forensic sketch artist creates an age progression to try and figure out what that missing child would look like in their teenage years or even in their adult years. A forensic artist performed the same thing in the case of Brian Shaffer. Based on how he looked at 27 years old when he went missing, he created an image of what he might look like all of these years later, now in his early 40s. Age progression is different from composite sketches or facial recognition, which forensic artists also can do. The forensic artist already knows what the person looks like, or at least what they used to look like. They have photographs of the person. But the art of age progression isn't a hard science like DNA or fingerprints. It can be very difficult to get right. Forensic artists need to understand the human face structure to create an age progression. They need to know how human faces grow, how they develop and change over the years, and also how they stay the same at the same time. They might also look at an individual's lifestyle to try and predict their age or how they would look at a certain age. For example, do they take care of themselves? Do they work out? Do they not? What are their genetics? What do their family members look like at a certain age? But because this isn't a hard science like DNA and fingerprints, it's not perfect. It's not exact. The age progression image a forensic artist comes up with is only a guess of what the person might look like. Sometimes they're spot on and lead to the capture or discovery of a wanted person, but sometimes they do absolutely nothing for the investigation. And in a worst case scenario, sometimes an age progression image that is not correct and is not accurate may actually lead investigators down the wrong path. Now, the goal behind Brian Shaffer's age progression is to help locate him if, in fact, he's still alive. Just like with a fugitive, what we saw back in America's Most Wanted, we want people to look at this image, and if they think they recognize it, then we want them to call into the police. They can see this image of Brian, of what he might look like now in his early 40s, and call it into the police. Until Brian's remains are found, the work of a forensic sketch artist is our biggest hope at solving this case. Or if there's someone out there who knows something. I'll be posting this age progression photo to our website, forensictales.com. So take a moment after this episode and go check it out for yourself. It'll just take a few minutes, and the family would greatly appreciate any tips. So if you look at this photo, you think you have seen Brian Shaffer, or you think you have seen someone who looks like him, the more eyes we have looking for Brian Shaffer, the more his family has a chance at some bit of closure. Brian Shaffer's mysterious disappearance has devastated his family, friends, and loved ones. And it has left us all wondering, where is he? What happened to him? Will we ever know how he got out of that bar without anyone seeing him, without detection? Will we ever find him? Following his disappearance, the only surviving member of the immediate Shaffer family is Brian's younger brother, Derek. Then there's also Brian's girlfriend, Alexis. From day one, she was active in his search, putting up missing person flyers, calling his cell phone every single day, and holding out hope that one day the answers will come. Today, Alexis has moved on with her life, at least as probably as best as she could after such a tragedy. She's married, but still hopeful. Brian's father's website is still active and receives tips sparingly. When this episode airs, Brian has been missing for over 15 years. If alive, he would now be in his 40s. The FBI has assigned Brian's case to the Homicide, Missing Persons, and the Crime Analysis Units. At the time of his disappearance, he was 6'2", 165 pounds. He had brown hair and hazel eyes. He had a pearl jam tattoo on his upper right arm. Anyone with information about Brian Shaffer's disappearance is asked to contact the Central Ohio Crime Stoppers Unit at 614-645-8477. They are offering a $100,000 reward for any credible information in the case. If you have information and you wish to remain anonymous, you can. Any information disclosed to the Central Ohio Crime Stoppers Unit can remain anonymous if requested. Please, if you have any information or think you might know where Brian is or what happened to him, or you think you may have seen him, call the police. You can also contact Detective Andre Edwards of the Columbus Police Department at 614-645-4624 or contact the FBI at 1-800-634-4097. If Brian Shaffer is still alive, we can bring him home. And if he isn't, we can help bring a small amount of relief and justice to the Shaffers' only surviving family member, Brian's younger brother, Derek. To share your thoughts on the mysterious disappearance of Brian Shaffer, be sure to follow the show on Instagram and Facebook at Forensic Tales. Do you think a forensic sketch will help locate him if he's still alive? Let me know what you think happened to him. To find out what I think about the case, sign up to become a patron at patreon.com/forensictales. After each episode, I release a bonus episode where I share my personal thoughts and opinions about the case. This is where I get the opportunity to say what I think happened to Brian Shaffer. To check out photos from the case, be sure to head to our website, forensictales.com. Don't forget to subscribe to Forensic Tales so you don't miss an episode. We release a new episode every Monday. If you love the show, consider leaving us a positive review or tell friends and family about us. You can also help support the show through Patreon. Thank you so much for joining me this week. Please join me next week. We'll have a brand new case and a brand new story to talk about. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings. Forensic Tales is a Rockefeller audio production. The show is written and produced by me, Courtney Fretwell Areola. For a small monthly contribution, you can create new compelling cases for the show, help fund research, and assist with production and editing cost. In addition, for supporting the show, you'll become one of the first to listen to new ad-free episodes, as well as snag some exclusive show merchandise not available anywhere else. To learn more about how you can support the show, head over to our Patreon page, patreon.com/forensictales, or simply click the support link in the show notes. You can also support the show by leaving a positive review or spreading the good word about us. Forensic Tales is a podcast made possible by our Patreon producers, Tony A., Nicole L., William R., David B., Sammy, Paula G., Selena C., Nicole G., Christine B., and Christina M. If you'd like to become a producer of the show, head over to our Patreon page or send me an email at Courtney@forensictales.com to find out how you can become involved. For a complete list of sources used in this episode, please visit forensictales.com. Thank you so much for listening. Your support of the show means the world to me. I'll see you next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings.